thank you everybody for having me. Awesome. And if you don't mind letting me share my screen.
Yep.
I
Sherry
thought I did
can,
that.
yeah.
Hang on, Alexandra. I thought I did that. My apologies.
Oh, you're good. You're good. Well, thank you everybody for having me. Surely
you're
it
good.
took me forever to learn how to pronounce my club's name because it's Albemarle. It's everybody, like nobody ever pronounces it right. But we're out here in the Charlottesville area, which is pretty much if you know where the University of Virginia is at, that's where we are. And my story with Rotary is interesting. I grew up from Nicaragua, so I come from a third world country. So corruption, crime, you name it, there's really no rule of law for us. Laws are guidelines. Versus, like Americans that are very uptight. But one thing that you learn when you're growing up in Nicaragua is doesn't matter how much money you have, if it's not available, it's not available. It's like, to me, I find it so crazy how Americans, it's like something doesn't even break, just gets old, and people are like, oh, I need to change it immediately. And back home, it was like, no, until the thing breaks, you're not getting anything new, because there's really no reason for you to enter into this like crazy immediate gratification culture of, oh my God, I need all the like next and shiny things. But I grew up pretty much like with poverty in my face, like with the fact of I just had to leave like one block from my house, and immediately you would see kids already begging on the street for like a couple pennies and stuff just to be able to make ends meet. And a lot of times you would see the parents, instead of sending their kids to school, you would actually have them in the streets because they needed to make income and they needed to make ends meet. And that's when you see like those levels of extreme poverty. Before Venezuela happened, Nicaragua was actually one of the poorest the poorest Spanish speaking country in the American continent. This is before like Venezuela went south. Now we're slightly richer than Venezuela, but we're still but we're still very, very poor, and we're run by a very corrupt government that facilitates a lot of, like, say, like drug trafficking and stuff like that. And what the Nicaraguan government has done, and this is a little bit of a precursor to my presentation, is they have not allowed like drug cartels to settle themselves in the country, because the government is the cartel itself. So it's really interesting, because organized crime is not just, say, like people running organizations, it can be government running organized crime. So the organized crime takes multiple forms. But since I digressed a bit, going back into Rotary, when I started the business, first thing that I was looking for was to get a tax person, because God forbid in this country you don't pay your taxes. It's the one sin that cannot be forgiven. And my tax guy was a Rotarian. And I mentioned to him, hey, like, I want to donate to charity, but how can I do it in a tax friendly way? And he's like, look at Rotary. And then I started looking at Rotary, and I met Amelia Stansel, who's just an awesome individual, really aligned with like this whole anti-trafficking movement. And when I met her, I was like, oh my God, I didn't know that Rotary would do such a thing. And that's pretty much what sold me to be part of Rotary. Because like organized crime and all these kinds of like horrible like trafficking that exists is such an evil that doesn't let anybody have that true freedom, like true joy, and actually get to be like their best selves. So that's kind of like the bit of my Rotary story. And every day I get more and more impressed of like just like how far and wide Rotary goes, because one of the softwares that we use to track cryptocurrency and like an illicit activity, the CEO and I believe founder is also a Rotarian. So it's just crazy how Rotarians are all over the place, and sometimes you don't even know. But with that, let's start with investigations 101. So what exactly is an investigation? Like it's simple. It's the act or process of carefully searching or thoroughly examining in order to discover facts. So what does that mean? Like, let's cut through the noise, let's cut through the emotions, let's cut through how do you feel about things, is what happened, what are the facts, is this thing black or is it blue or is it green? Like, let's figure out what are the facts. That is what an investigation is. Now, they can be either like proactive or reactive. So what does that mean? So in a reactive setting is a crime happened and now I need to figure out how it happened, who was involved, like the whole thing. And usually the what I would like to say, the professional term is shit has hit the fan and you need to move quickly. Um, in the proactive side of things is you suspect and you pull somebody in to help you figure it out if something's even happening or if you have the vulnerability for something to happen. So that's also like an important part. Being proactive can actually be such a big game changer in an investigation. Now, there are like the million and one kinds of of investigations, and we're going to get into them, but just essential responsibilities that an investigator has, and this is pretty much, I would say, like standard across the board, is the investigator has to identify like lines of inquiry. So in other words, like what are the different resources that I have to tap into to figure all of this out? Like you can't leave any stone unturned. You got to secure the material, you got to record the information, you got to produce a report giving the evidence. You uh and then you also, depending on the engagement, right, like you have to retain the record so they could be used, like should it goes to court, like if these need to be properly preserved. So that just depends on like what kind of investigation that you're doing and stuff like that. Now, the different kinds of investigations, you've got civil, which is kind of like saying, like, say for example, divorce, employment stuff, the more like typical disagreements, not that crazy. You've got cyber and digital forensics. That's somebody hacked me. I fell for an online scam and stuff like that. Somebody has managed to install malware on my computer and just wiped everything out and took all of my like sensitive data. So those would be like cyber and digital forensics investigation. You've got corporate related investigations, which is a lot of what we do, which is, pretty much focus on like the corporate environment, working with companies, figuring out what happened or preventing something from happening, or even preventing, say, from then engaging with like another corporate like company that doesn't even exist. It has happened. You get criminal investigations, which is more like that line of say like financing terrorism, sanctions evasion, facilitating drug trafficking and stuff like that. Financial crimes, which is also big, like that one's like your typical follow the money, but that one's really, really crucial. And then you have like other kinds of general investigations that just take any shape and form. Um, so what is a financial crime? And like the reason why I want to like make an emphasis on this is because for us, following the money is such a critical part of our methodology. Following the money is not just following the transactions. Like there's so many facets to following the money that you got to understand it really, really well in order to do a really good investigation. So a financial crime is a nonviolent action that results in the unlawful taking, moving, hiding, or disguising of money or other value by the use of guile or artifice, corruption, or deception for the benefit of the perpetrator or another. What does that mean? It means that it's nonviolent. I take money in an illicit way, and then I have to figure out a way to clean it and make it clean and integrate it into the system. So there is 5 phases of financial crimes. You got the planning, the execution, the laundering, victim loss identification, asset recovery. By the time we get to the victim loss identification and the asset recovery part, there's no guarantee you're going to recover stuff. So it's always ideal to be on the preventive side of things than to be on the reactive side of things. You can recover a lot, but you're not going to recover everything. So that's just something that ideally you just don't want to fall for a financial crime. I say like a lot of times we're guilty of the crime of ignorance, that we fall for a crime and it was out of ignorance. We didn't know. We were too trusting, and boom, we facilitated a crime. We fell for something, and the one who ends up losing is us for ignorance. Um, some of the financial crimes commonalities, like this is something that happens with every single financial crime. They all involved money laundering. They all result in tax evasion. I have never seen a criminal declare taxes. They all require a financial institution. They interface with government agencies, and they create the need for asset recovery. The interfacing with government agencies, pretty much like with government entities, it pretty much means like that's when the government is getting involved in trying to recover the money or like conducting the investigation. Um, Now, the different kinds of financial crimes, you've got money laundering, terrorist financing, sanctions evasion, bribery and corruption, fraud, and tax evasion. So money laundering and terrorist financing are very, very similar. And a lot of times they get grouped together. But a key difference is in terrorist financing, you will see transactions that are normal. So, for example, you will see them buy food, pay for apartment, pay bills. So it can be a bit misleading versus money laundering is just specifically laundering dirty funds. And terrorist financing mixes clean and dirty money. So that's just a key distinction. Sanctions evasions, um, I don't know how many of you are familiar with like economic sanctions, but if you hear like say like the United States sanctioned Russia for the invasion of Ukraine, and all of like you're seeing like all these companies, banks, whatever are being sanctioned. A sanctions evasion scheme is if you're sanctioned, but you still want to perform transactions, so you find somebody that's going to do your work and that is not sanctioned, and then this person is liaising and doing the business with like say like US parties, and the US parties are paying this person, but in reality the one who's benefiting is the sanctioned entity. So that is a financial crime. Like that is sanctions evasion. Bribery and corruption, that's usually pretty broad. It tends to be grouped on the government level, but the reality is it's not just government. There are huge bribery and corruption scandals on the corporate level. Uh, Oliverecho's being one of the biggest one, a Brazilian company that was just bribing its way left and right, and the scheme that it went to was insane. They were getting these projects just because they were bribing left and right just to get the the advantage. And bribery and corruption, embezzlement also falls in there. You fraud kind of being the next category and being the most common, and then tax evasion is literally not paying your taxes. Now, there is a thing called tax avoidance, which is legal. That's pretty much figuring out ways to pay less taxes. So if you're a business owner, instead of having 100K profit, from that profit that you have, you decide to invest it into something else, like in the business or something that will down the line generate more revenue and stuff. That is you lowering your like how much taxes you have to declare, and that's a legal way of doing it, and it's actually in a way that you're benefiting society, but that's not a tax evasion, that's tax avoidance. Tax evasion is flat out, I'm not going to pay my taxes and I'm going to figure out a way of not paying my taxes. That's tax evasion. So the three stages of money laundering, you've got placement, layering, and integration. In the placement area, you integrate, like you insert the dirty money, and that could be, say, like you buy real estate, you buy luxury goods, you create a fake company, you create a cash intensive business, whatever it is, and then you get the account, and from that account you move the money into various kinds of financial vehicles that are going to help you layer the money, and then you find that by that point, then like you integrate the money, and then the origin of the money is almost untraceable. You want to be able to catch the money before it gets placed, because once the layering begins, it usually moves so fast, it's really, really hard to catch, and it's fully integrated, and then you have this mix of you don't know what's clean and what's dirty. Now let's jump into what is organized crime in and of itself. So organized crime is a criminal enterprise, and I want to make an emphasis on the fact that they are an enterprise, they are a business. If you have worked at a company, like in a particularly maybe a big company that is established, you have processes, you have procedures, you have a hierarchy, all of that is in place, right? Because it's for the success of the business. Same thing with organized crime. The big difference is their product, their service is something nefarious, but they operate like a business and they follow rules. They don't follow our rules, they follow their rules, and a lot of times they're actually more stringent. But the ultimate goal is profit. And it's profiting from illicit activities that have just such great demands. Their continued existence is maintained through corruption of public officials. It's not a secret that there's a lot of politicians that have been bribed, paid under the table, just to turn a blind eye. Or they use, say, like extortion or coercion to like intimidate people, so that way nobody touches their operations. And then the types of activities do vary across countries, but they tend to be like organized crime is not necessarily constrained to one place. It can be regional, it can be like cross, like global. It just depends on the nature of the organization, the type of crime that they're picking. So what is their purpose? It's obtained directly or indirectly a financial or other material benefit. An example being like you can have a pedophile ring, and maybe they're not necessarily looking for money, and what they want is just like those like horrible child pornography videos, and this pedophile ring is just trading those child pornography videos amongst each other, and they're sharing the costs, or maybe they're even trafficking kids. And and the goal is not to make money out of it for them, is more like that pleasure of being able to molest a kid, um which is extremely disgusting, but that's kind of like how they view it. Some of the commonalities of organized crime is they know no borders, they seek to maximize profit at all costs, they tend to operate in the shadows, they use complex money laundering and tax evasion schemes. A lot of it is based on trust and connections, and culture will influence their behavior and tactical decisions. And what does that mean? And I want to make a big emphasis on this. Latin Americans, just a normal Latin American will do business a certain way. Americans do business a certain way. Canadians do business a certain way. Depending on what part of Europe you're in, they do business a certain way. You go to Asia, they do business a certain way. You go to the Middle East, they do business a certain way. And this is just like the normal people. Now, in organized crime, that translates into organized crime. The way that like these organized crime activities, depending on who's headed and what are their origins, that's going to define a lot of their typologies and how they make decisions. A key example is if you have a narco from the Soviet region versus a narco from Latin America, both of them are going to have a mistress. That's a fact. But what's the key difference there? And as well as like their business operations. I mean, like the drug is going to be pretty much a very similar supply chain. But the key difference here comes down to the mistress. Why? Because the Latin American mistress is literally for sex, for pleasure. It's a booty call. May not even be the same one. The Soviet mistress is actually one that matters. Most likely upper class, some form of, say, maybe political elite. She matters. She's consistent. There is a mistress. It's the mistress. It's not just a booty call. And she's going to be part of that money laundering scheme. So that's a key difference. And that's something that if you don't understand that cultural nuance, it's going to completely like affect the results of your investigations. Now, what are some of the transnationality elements? It's committed in more than one state. It's committed in one state, but a substantial part of like the preparing, the planning, the execution, whatever, is in another state. It's committed in one state, but it involves an organized crime group that operates in different states, or it's committed in one state, but it affects all like a bunch of other states, like surrounding areas. Now, some of the overlaps with terrorism, and here's an interesting thing, because you can have an organized crime group, let's just say like a drug trafficking group, and then a terrorist organization operating in the same area. They both have different forms of doing business, but then they're in the same area. They choose to kind of like, okay, you do you, I do me, like let's not cross and let's be fine. But then they realize, you know what? You have some things that benefit me, I have some things that benefit you. Why don't we make a mutually beneficial alliance, right? And that way, like we support each other operationally, and that's how they start kind of like integrating with each other. And then you get to that point of convergence of the fact that they become so intertwined that these two groups now become one. They keep the same like criminal activity going, but they also now incorporate all that terrorist activity as well. So they morph into one and they combine the two modus operandis, and that's something that's very, very, very dangerous. However, in that process of convergence, if something happens that makes one group start distrusting the other, it turns into like a flat out like war between the two, because they operate on trust, and if they cannot trust each other, it's war and it's to the death. Um, so that's just something that's very interesting, and you're seeing this trend of some organized crime groups actually starting to merge with terrorist groups, and that's really scary. Now, some of the different kinds of activities, like provision of illicit goods and services, those would be your trafficking, right? Like the drug trafficking, the organ smuggling, human trafficking, human smuggling, arms trafficking. Fun fact about like arms trafficking is interesting because it can be legal or it can be illegal. So that's an interesting one. And then the infiltration of legitimate businesses or government, and that's usually done through bribery, coercion, corruption, extortion, as well as supply chain exploitation. So if you can figure out a weak point in the supply chain of an organization, then you can take advantage of that and use it in your favor. Now, some of the financial vehicles that organized crimes use, for example, for human trafficking, all these are usually based on cash-intensive businesses, but say escort services, illicit massage, domestic work, porn, like the porn industry being huge, huge, huge in this. And one thing that about the porn industry is there is the legal porn industry and there's the illegal porn industry. There's this podcast called Hot Money. It was done by the Financial Times. Really interesting because they dive into the world of legal porn. And legal porn is pretty much the ones that are operating above board that can accept regular payments, Visa, MasterCard, you name it. But what keeps porn legal versus what makes porn illegal is Visa and MasterCard have a set of guidelines that they say we will process payments as long as you don't violate any of these guidelines. And some of them might be you can't have like children, like it cannot be child's pornography, there can be no bestiality, certain words cannot be said. And that podcast gets really interesting because like there's the fine line of say, okay, how many slaps can you do before it turns into something that would be considered a domestic abuse situation, right? And then you cannot process, like then Visa or MasterCard will not process a payment. So that's just that's a very interesting podcast. Highly recommended. You also have scam call centers. So a form of trafficking, it doesn't have like, I mean, you guys know that trafficking is not necessarily just sex, right? But you have these like forced labor situations where particularly it's happening in Asia, in like that Golden Triangle region, where people are being told, hey, we have this amazing job opportunity, and the families pay the trafficker to take their kids to this amazing job opportunity because new future, poor situation. And the kid goes with like super excited, great, everything's great. And then they get there and what their job is, it's a scam center. They have to be doing all these like calling scams and trying to get people to fall into a scam. Of course, the kid says, no, I don't want to do this. And then the trafficker says, well, you owe me all this much for me bringing you out here. So then the trafficker says, you know what, if you work for me 6 months, I'll let you go. But what happens is, because these are scam centers and they're not highly successful, 6 months go, the bill keeps on racking up because in those 6 months they're getting lodging, they're getting food, so they're not able to meet the quota and the bill is still high, so they keep on being trafficked and sometimes they're being passed from one place to another. So I mean, here's the whole list, but it's very interesting just like how the variations happen, and it comes down to like, is it forced or is it not forced? In drug trafficking, narco ambulances, so those are just kind of like ambulances that are literally just trafficking drugs, ant plants and buses. So that is one of, you're transporting drugs like in very, very small percentages. So drug traffickers are also using drones. They are camouflaging illegal shipments, chemical masking, air transportations, political buyouts, drug mules. Drug traffickers are really, really creative. In arms trafficking, you got legal, and you got like illegal, right? So there's always a gray area with arms trafficking, but they use a lot of brokers. They use a lot of the gray market, the black market. Importers and exporters facilitate a lot of these transshipments, false invoicing. You can smuggle them. Misclassification of dual use goods. So a dual use good is something that could be used as a military technology, and a military technology, like if it's a military technology, you cannot just export it that easily. So what ends up happening then is I purposely misclassify it and say, no, this is not a military technology. This is just a normal thing. And so that's a misclassification of a dual use good, because dual use goods are highly regulated and you can export it easily. And that way, and you're just moving arms left and right, and arms that probably should not be going to the wrong people. Like just because you want to make this sale, fraudulent registrations, dark web marketplaces. Those are like some of the like vehicles that arms traffickers use. Now this example that I want to talk about. So I say here, like, follow the money. Like when I was talking about it, is follow the money is, it's great if you're a financial institution and you can actually see the transactions, but you don't always have that privilege. So you actually have to get creative and start figuring out what are the connections, right? Because I met Shirley through Amelia. I met Amelia through Rudy. Okay. I met Rudy through this lady that when I went to college was a mentor for me. She was the one who referred me to Rudy. So you see already there's a big chain going on. Boom, 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 boom. From me to Shirley. It's like 4 degrees apart. Like I would have normally not met Shirley directly. So that's important to understand, because you can look at me and then you can look at Shirley, you will say there's no way Alex and Shirley have a relationship. But if you look closely and you start seeing out the network of connections, then you realize, wait, 4 degrees apart could be significant or it could be insignificant. So I just want to show you guys like this example of this Danish firm that facilitated a lot of money to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. So the dot in red here in this presentation is the company, the Danish company, and you see the 2 owners there. And one thing that's interesting about these kinds of schemes is a lot of times you don't know where they begin or how they end. But the 2 people that were in control of the company and that owned the company had ties to Iran. But if you see, they were moving money left and right and all over the place. And the beneficiary is that one. And that company was actually owned by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. So this is just an example of a scheme, and they used multiple accounts, multiple companies, multiple people just to eventually get to the final destination. Now, one thing that's interesting is this is actually not cheap to execute. When you engage in laundering and tax evasion stuff, you're going to lose a significant percentage of the money. But you still prefer to do that than to say like do things legally. But that is just an example of how complicated these can get. And truth be told, this is actually a pretty simple scheme. The more complicated it gets, like it's sometimes like you can't even like see like all these like connections in one screen. It can get pretty crazy. And on that note, does anybody have any questions?
So in the on the pornography, are you saying that Visa and MasterCard would approve animated pornography? Does that fall in their purview or outside?
It could fall under purview. So Visa and MasterCard. So So Visa and MasterCard, and these credit card, like this financial payment processors, they have guidelines as to what they will process and what they will not process. So as long as you don't break their guidelines, they will process that payment. So, and it's a really long and complex document, but animated or not animated, they could. And
Well,
it's
I think we were all happy when they got booted out from Backpage. They would no longer allow them to use Visa, MasterCard, and American Express. But now the largest growing porn industry is animated porn coming out of Japan, number one. And I would love if you could find out if that, because that would just set up alarms in my head, just to say that that's disgusting.
Yeah, I mean, I can take a look. But so the thing is, financial like payment processors, they will process a transaction as long as it does not violate the law. And it's operated in a gray area that as long as certain rules are not broken, that like they will process the payment.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's cartoons, they could say. It's
Exactly.
It's puppets, the bull excuses that they would use. But I would, if you're in your research, if you find that out, I think we'd all like to know, because that would make me do certain things to not use Visa, MasterCard, et cetera, because they process payments for pornography. If I find that out, they're gone.
I can definitely take a look, and if I find something, I will let you know.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. A wonderful presentation. I felt like I went to school. and there's not much room left up there. Yeah. Do I hear an amen? Yeah. Okay, fine. Yeah.
And Joyce, I see
Alexander,
your
I'm
hand
glad
up.
to see that you could laugh.
Yeah.
Joyce, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
I think the other thing that charge companies do or businesses do is the transaction might be for one thing, but the name of the organization is something else. I've had the exact reverse happen to me when I was in Thailand, and I had a suit made, and they brought it to the hotel, and clearly I have no idea who they thought they were making it for, because the jacket was too short and everything else was out of proportion. So I called the credit card company immediately and said I wanted to stop this transaction. And they looked in the charge and it said, well, we can't do it for massage parlor. And I said, it's for a suit. But the name that they put it in, so this is a way that they can put it in so you cannot reverse the charge.
Yeah.
And so I would think that it would happen the other way too. It might be for a massage or something, but they might say textiles or something to mess up the trail. So my question to you is, how do you as an investigator figure out if the transaction that's being made is, how it's being described? Is it because if there's a high volume of one type of business?
So there are different typologies that go into play, right? So looking more from the corporate side of things is, say, the red flags that you would see from, let's just using the massage parlor as an example. If a legitimate one is properly incorporated, has all the accounts under the massage parlor, even the advertising is pretty clean and transparent. If it's being used for illicit purposes or for trafficking, a lot of times what you will see is the commonality would be the address, like the address of the physical
Mhm.
location, but the company is registered under the name of one person. The cell phone bill is under another person. The internet bill is under another person. So you see all this like crazy like layering of using the trafficking victims that are being placed in so many, like, are being used as the name in the front for it, and the only commonality is the address. Where I would say the challenge comes in is, look, no bank is really actively gonna say like, oh, I'm gonna dedicate a task force to investigate, because that's more a law enforcement kind of situation. Law enforcement, the trend lately has been is they are being short staffed, so you need a lot of labor force and a lot of human power to be able to do all these like crazy analytics and be looking at everything and turning every single stone. And I think that's the challenge right now. The challenge right now is you don't have in law enforcement, they have the will, but they don't necessarily have the manpower. And so they're forced right now to be in a situation where they have to prioritize what they go after. And say somebody like me, who I'm more on the corporate side of things, I'm happy to do the investigations, but I don't have access to everything because I'm not government. So somebody like me has to get creative and use other tools, say like using open source intelligence, maybe even having to put boots on the ground and do some like physical surveillance. You just have to get creative on different ways and then build a relationship with law enforcement and share with them like our findings and say, hey, we found this, we really, really suspect this is going on, but I don't have the authority to go to a bank and tell the bank, hey, can you show me the transactions? Do you have any transactions for this? Because the bank will not give them to me. However, the bank will give it to law enforcement. So it's a multi-step process, and it's not as simple as it should be, which sucks. And unfortunately, the good guys were playing by rules that bind us versus the illicit actors play by their rules and they have no limits. So they do have an advantage. So we have to get creative on other fronts to try and stop them.
Yeah, right,
I'm-
right. You're on the East Coast, so yeah, for you, it's a little bit more reasonable timing. All right.
Yeah.
Well-
Yeah, well, any questions? I'm putting my contact information up for in case anybody just wants to reach out. You're welcome to like shoot me a hoot, like shoot an email, whatever. Shoot me a text. More than happy to keep the conversation going, and thank you guys for having me.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I really appreciated your information. It was wonderful. Ozarks was a good show to watch to learn a little bit about
Oh,
this.
oh, absolutely.
As you were doing this, I was like, yep. I'm like, they got that right, didn't they? Yeah, very
It's
informative. Yeah, very informative TV show on how to launder money.
Yeah, no, it is, but look, the reality is people got to wake up and realize not everything is what it seems like. You know, like I could look very sharp, very polished, but I could be running a criminal organization.
Yep.
So appearances are deceiving, and it's always good to trust but verify. Sorry, my little terrorist is hearing somebody at the door. But I think like doing due diligence and trying to figure out if it's really like what is being said is true, then like you will be able to figure that out pretty quickly. But you have to be open to realizing there could be red flags, and if you see something that doesn't add up, I would stop and just question a bit further. And if something seems too good to be true, it's a lie. It's not that like don't get involved in that. Sometimes it's best to step away.
Well, thank you very much, Alexandra. I really appreciate your time coming here today. I've been looking forward to your presentation. I'm a data geek, so I enjoyed learning and I enjoyed the information you shared. Thank you very, very much. I'm going to go ahead and